One of the things that's very intriguing to get into the minds of uh, Dr. Duncan McCormick in a recent interview. It's a fascinating guy. He comes up with a very brief statement rattling off about the cooling tower in Edinburgh. And it is so familiar to me. You go back into the Legionnaire's disease, and the same themes and the same thoughts and the same ideas. He's just rattling these things off. This is a professor or taught. I mean, this is a professional, a medical professional or some kind of analyst who is in the medical profession, and he's painting this torrid picture of epidemiology and how this is structured in a way, and he keeps pointing us toward the final judgment is the cooling tower. He talks about chemicals, he talks about this and that, but everything he's saying is pretty much a repeat of what was said in the first days and in the articles, with some exceptions, of the 1976 Legionnaire's disease, which is related to, yes, a cooling tower, so to speak, a refrigerant. And what I've talked about before is pretty much, he's got one part of this together, but he should look south toward his neighbor in Southampton and ask a few questions, rather than, as he says, he's talking to all the families around, and he's asking Mrs. Jones or Mrs. McCormick or Mrs. Whatever, was your husband wearing purple trousers at the time? And he left his office. Epidemiology, the sources of where you were and where you were going, what pubs were you visiting, and he's looking at the outer rim of an outbreak, and it's a difficult process, he says. Well, this is certainly a difficult process. It's not any more unfathomable than it was in 1976, when the same kind of track was heard by many people, certainly not the public, but the people who were trying to decipher what seemed to be the same thing that Dr. Duncan McCormick is making something out of in a point. It's about as deep as the Puerto Rican fault. I mean, when you think about the depth of the constant issue, what is the causation? How long has this been going on? It's been going on for over 35 years. Since 1976, we've been hearing the same thing. Look to yourself. Go down to Southampton and ask them a few questions. You're down there. It's called British American Tobacco. They know something. The fault is not nearly like the one that you might find in the Puerto Rican fault, which is very deep. And it's more like finding problems in Elsinore, and he talks about larger questions. Well, of course there are larger questions, but you haven't struck the note of some kind of contemptuousness for judging where the fault might lie. it certainly is partly due to what he alludes to in terms of the cooling tower and chemicals and that sort of thing. And he says he was looking for connecting factors. Well, I've already connected the factors. And in previous tapes, I've mentioned if you're looking for some solutions and answers to this, all you have to do is look down toward some of the documentation that's already been recorded and created for you, especially since 1988, where I absorbed a certain amount of information, and it was distributed through various sources, including those who are anti-tobacco activists, and that's not my branch, but I'm certainly interested in solving a problem for you. For us, your connecting factors are not even close to where you are. You're asking questions about what color your pants are and what public house you might have been visiting, and then you come down to it's just a demographic or a geographic or a epidemiological phenomena that you're looking at. Of course it is. Well, you're not also including the factor that just the matter of having people living near Southwest Edinburgh is not just the fleur de mal here. There's something else that you're missing, and I'm going to tell you that if you've all got an interest in what happened in 1976 with tidal Legionnaire's disease, the real event. It's not in a petri dish. It was never a bacterial thing. Of course, if you're going to indicate the cooling towers and say, well, there are 16 cooling towers around here, and this is you're looking for some kind of map, that's close. It's going to get you nearer to the heart of disseminating some information to the people, so they can walk around freely. But what they found out in 1976, what the people who weren't really part of the process, it's not found in the CDC, because the CDC was absolutely convinced that they weren't going to indict any chemical company, and they certainly weren't going to allow DuPont or any of the other freon manufacturers from this kind of thing. And they certainly weren't going to. I mean, you're in Scotland, and I doubt that you're going to indict a distillery as a practical source for producing an epidemic of Legionnaire's disease. Besides, this is not a pandemic. This is not a pandemic situation. There's not going to be a lot of cases. It's like a cruise ship. Very seldom do we pay much attention to cruise ships, and yet they're very, very, very totally the perfect setting for Legionnaire's disease. Why do we call it Legionnaire's disease? Because in 1976, in the summer in Philadelphia, there were about 100 men and women who came down with it. Some were not the Legionnaires, but many were part of the celebration that was going on at one hotel, and then at another hotel as well. But it was also involving people who were passing by, and some people who actually worked on inside the hotel didn't have anything. So the questions are interesting, but the basic question for the mapping out of what you have is not in the purple trousers or where you were, or it certainly is one question. But the rest of it is part of what might be the liberation of expended or non-expended freon of the older sort, or maybe the newer as well. It doesn't matter much. It's a gas, and it comes in contact with moisture. It has a catalyst, and there's certainly heat. In 1976, there were many people who were not baffled by this. Well, there were several who were totally committed to trying to find a solution, and part of that was the process of making expanded tobacco and creating freon, and by so doing, the process became part of an issue in itself, and so when these things happen, you're looking to the health authorities, and health authorities very often, as in the case of the CDC in 1976 in the summer and in the fall, and certainly when the hearings were held in 76, and certainly the biggest one in 77, nothing but subterfuge and mendacity. And it didn't lead to anything, but the paper trail is here. It's already here. It's available. It's on public. It's in the tobacco companies. And essentially, it's not a difficult process. It's simply a process of asking the right questions. And we all know that the process of G13, or at least as I've introduced it now, if you haven't read about it, it has something to do with your problem today. And certainly anybody living around that area would have some exposure. Now, what you have, though, is not a bacterial problem, and it's fine that you're treating it, and you're treating it as doctors have written the textbooks on this, as Legionello's disease and so forth. But I really think that, searching for who was wearing the purple trousers in and around the epidemiology factors, the factors that lead you to nowhere. You're not mapping out anything. You have Legionnaire's disease. If you do, you have the same thing, subterfuge and mendacity, that occurred. If it's mendacity, maybe it's a little bit more than that. Maybe it's just plain fraud. But I don't think your public officials really are going to be of any help to you. And Dr. Duncan, McCormick, pretty much the same. You have an epidemic, a small one, they usually are, and they don't occur very frequently, but you have perfect conditions. A distillery with the heat, the coke catalyst most likely, the moist environment, and leaking freon. An old place, there's no question about it in my mind. So if you connect these factors and look at the history, it's very simple, Dr. McCormick. You just have to follow the right map, and it certainly is not as deep or unfathomable as the Puerto Rican fault. You can get there, and the only thing about it is, do you want to get there? It implicates a lot of friends or a lot of corporate interests, and they've held it together for a long time. Of course, it's not that hard to find. It's really all out there, and it's on paper, and you can find it. I'm Merrill Williams, and I'm a reluctant tobacco whistleblower, but nevertheless, I think it's interesting to follow how things develop in Scotland, and as long as you're treating the people, it's going to be a limited epidemic, as they always are. There's no such thing as Legionnaire's disease without freon, and without the escaping gas, and without the conditions. There you are. You have them all. You have the old building. You have the cooling towers, as you referred to. So explain it to people. Explain it to them the right way. That's it. Thank you very much.